It's working. I'm blown away. Either lunch was not that good, or you guys are super nice. Because this is the farthest away room of the whole conference, right? I mean, I just want to get that one right. Thank you for being here. Truly, truly appreciate it. Excuse me? You got the first one. You want to give it away? Don't volunteer. Don't volunteer, man. No. Sadly, we're not giving away pretty much anything but good knowledge and experience. Yeah, I know. It's like one person goes like, woo, that's exciting. I know. I wish. No, my area is sadder than that. If I had, the Surface Talks or something like that, you could push that way, but hybrid cloud, you can get some smoke. Let me ask you guys a question. So just a couple of questions, just before we start, right? Who here is an enterprise architect or does architecture? Good. Who's looking for a technical session on how to build the platform? Not necessarily that. I love honesty, right? So I love to come out straight and say what you're going to get and what you're not going to get. So if this is not what you want to get, then you want to stay. It's at your own risk, right? We're not going to go too deep technically. We're going to go very, very broad and very deep on how people are doing it. So the strategy about it. And even though I'm apologizing, it's a matter of speech. I apologize because I will use some Microsoft slides and some System Center and Windows Server slides that I'm sure you've seen or you know about in order to tell you some of these experiences. So you understand, I'm not trying to say that you don't get that, but it's a good reminder for me to go into that topic. So I'll show maybe a screenshot about the chargeback procedures and methods on Service Manager to talk to you about what we've seen customers use and do. It's not that I'm going to go deep into how to deploy that functionality within Service Manager and Virtual Machine Manager. Is that fair? Everybody's happy with that? Good stuff. We are right on track. Let's start. So again, thank you for being here. My name is Eduardo Kasner. It is a pleasure. I have a sin. If I get excited, I start talking too fast. You guys just have to go like this, and it's all good. Let's start. Well, I'll tell you something. This whole thing, here, let me go back to this slide. This whole thing haunted me for a while because I've seen, just like you, and I've read, just like you, enough cloud books to realize that everybody sort of knows what we want to define, but there's been few people that have actually built a hybrid environment, and that most of us are in that journey right now. Is that fair? And that being in that journey, it means that not all definitions are well done and that we're all going to stumble together. But the question was, can you build some good content? And that was my call to action. Can some good content be built around the practices? So I built the deck on three pillars. The first one being a very small pillar on why do it. Let's just figure out the right actions, right? The right problem to solve and the right solutions to go for. Because again, like you've heard 1,000 times before, Alice in Wonderland, if you don't know where you're going, it doesn't matter which road you take, same thing, right? So let's just agree on where the goal is. That's going to be very fast. That's going to take about 10, 15 minutes. If you are good with all that and you're like, this is boring, it'll just be 10 minutes of boring, okay? I don't think it'll be that boring, but I'm just saying that's only going to be a very short part of the presentation. Then I'm going to try to go deep into the how. The how is what practices we've seen people actually do. And while I'll talk very deep into how, and then I'll show you the Microsoft slides and I'll talk about the Microsoft stack because I work for Microsoft and etc., I will also try to tell you that it is pretty much a very agnostic piece of the presentation, which we'll talk about how you can do this, but also it's expansive to a heterogeneous stack. The last part, I don't know why I put it at last, maybe just to keep you in the session, I think is the most exciting one, which is custom and specific scenarios that we've seen, architectural scenarios of how people are using hybrid cloud. And so we'll go into, it's about 14 of them, right? And I'll go fairly fast in some, and I'll go deeper into others, of how we're seeing people actually adopt. So this is sort of the session of which scenarios people are picking to go into hybrid cloud. Now, when I say hybrid cloud, I'm sort of sorry because you're going to say, well, there's always a public cloud component to that, and there's always a private, and therefore I'm talking about cloud, period. But I say hybrid because I don't think that, and there's very few enterprises that have services that just run on public. And there's a lot of services that run on private, but here is what we're seeing most commonly, which is people adopt across. Fair? Good? Everybody's happy? Let's start. So the only trend slide that I like to keep is this one, and it is because if there's one thing that staggers me, is the amount and growth of data. So think of the whole slide as a single point, which is data is growing so fast that we have three huge problems. The first one is we can't solve it like we used to, right? 44x versus 1.4x of data growth versus how many people are graduating worldwide with an IT degree associated to them. So we don't have enough people to solve the data problem. Let's just start by that. So we got to be smarter than just throwing people at this. We don't have the budget, right? Because 70% of budget is still being allocated the old way for maintenance and 30% for new innovation. So again, huge problem. But the whole source of this is that just on email, in 2014, data growth was as bad as the last 3 years. And we're expecting 2015 to be the same as the last 5 years. So you could argue very easily, well, that's spam. Yes, it's spam, fine. But you know what? If I look at your transactional data, your business data, it's growing at a very similar rate. If I look at your email, just with the acceptance of me saying yes to you to go have lunch, we're looking at the same thing. So we don't know what is relevant in that data. Is that fair? We don't have a good classification to understand what about all this monster is valuable, what isn't, what's business classifiable, what isn't, what is compliance, and what isn't. So the problem turns to, are we looking at this on the right angles? Are we trying to solve it with the right lenses, right? Because there are incredible companies. Like, I'll say a lot of examples today. I won't say a single name unless I have the logo on the slide. Is that fair? So there's a truck and a tractor company who's building a business because they put sensors on all the tractors to sense how deep they drop the seed and the dew point and the climate and the type of seed. And the new type of company they're building is with all that data that they're gathering, they're going to sell patterns for agriculture. It's fascinating. So you see, you're creating something from the classification and understanding of your data. Because if they would just aggregate this into the whole monster of email and all the other, they couldn't separate it, right? They couldn't say, oh, we're going to make a new company based on this. And they couldn't build a trends company on that. So fascinating stuff what's happening today. By the way, that's happening today. But the whole problem, just to go back to this slide, is the corner. If you see the corner, I think it's the right-hand lower corner. The average $1 billion company, which in most economies would be a medium-sized company, has 48 different systems of ERP. So that's a great example. We have too much of everything and we're not consolidating. So that takes me to not this slide, which is something you're going to see in many places, but the biggest joke of the session today. So sadly, I don't have good jokes. I'm an IT person, but as good as it gets, we're running out of Greek acronyms. We're at zettabytes now. So the problem is we're going to have to turn to another language now because we're totally running out of the numbers. A zettabyte, by the way, is 10 to the 24 exabytes, which is 10 to the 24 petabytes. So we're at the 40 zettabytes now. So what's next? So understanding that, let's go completely to the opposite end. And then let's look at a case study. I want to share with you another one of these problems, big problems that we're facing today. So we faced a very interesting situation with Sandy. Everybody knows about Hurricane Sandy, right? Okay. So what happened with Sandy, for those of you who have not analyzed this deeply, is that it wasn't a single city calamity. It wasn't a disaster of a city. It was a disaster that hit multiple states. And if you look at the size that I'm talking here on the map, this is the size of half a country. I mean, this is huge. And so my point to you is, what happens when we have a disaster like this? You can have amazing dual data centers within a region that need diesel to run their generators so that you're up and running, and you have incredible high availability schemes. Fair? And everybody's happy with that. What happens if you can't get diesel because the problem spans across half of the country? So how long are you going to be able to run? 2 days? 5 days? A week? You see where I'm going? What happens when you're failing over from New York to New Jersey like many other companies there? Well, understand, both data centers were hit just as bad. So this became a huge, 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 horrible problem. And in that sense, we did very interesting actions. The first action is obviously the development on hurricane status and health services. Because understand, when there's anything this level, you have to care for people. Is that fair? You have to care for people first. Right? So health services is the most important thing you can do. And second, all the contingency plans, because that's what you built for. Agreed? Now, just to make the point, because like you see, these slides are just very fast for me. I just want to intro the whole conversation. Every service had an impact because of this, because we have a couple of data centers. When I say a couple, I mean more than 2, less than 5, and I'm not going to say specifically how many, but in that area. And I'm talking about the New England and the East Coast, if you wish, northern and East Coast. And all these services, which for us, as you can see here, if I say half, I'm talking loose, but half of them are business and the other half are consumer related, and they were all impacted. But what was interesting is the effect was drop in capacity, water flooding, leakage, etc. The result, because of all the architectures that I'm trying to talk to you about today, was no impact on any single user. No effect. So let's hope that the architectures that we build have this in mind, okay? And so now I've just faced you with 2 very daunting, horrible, huge problems. The first one is data. And the second one is the old methods that we've used so far may not work in this brave new world. Is that fair? So even this incredible method to do replication of data centers, replication of stacks, may just not continue to work. So with that said, let's just start with the whole agenda that I mentioned to you. The challenge that's facing us today is that business needs to transform. Like I just told you about this tractor company. The other end of this, because you understand this, they want to grow and increase return on investment, as well as they want to run better existing environments and leaner and meaner, and that's fine. But the problem that we have is that we have growing complexity, which is all my first 5 slides, but we have another problem, which is silos. Let me go for 1 second into this. I think the biggest problem that we have today in IT, in corporate IT, is that everything is siloed. And it can be siloed by technology, by platform, by budget, by region, by power, by management stack, by identity stack. Should I continue? By data stack, by database. Is that fair? And so what happens, each one of these platforms, which is segmented, each one of these silos, wants to do the best they can, right? I mean, I don't know anybody who goes to work in the morning and says, I'm going to just mess up with everybody. Well, I know a couple, but I'm not going to mention them here. So those people is not what we're talking about. We're talking about 99% of us who wake up and say, with whatever I'm handed, I'm going to do the best. So they buy tools and they create processes. But what happens, because of the silos and because of this segmentation, we end up with partial and segmented processes and manual effects, and that ends up with inefficiency. So let me just spell it out very simply. I ask you, how fast does it take you to spin up an environment? And you say 2 weeks. And I say, why? And you say, because we need to go through 2 outsourcers, 5 internal people, 2 committees, and that's it. You got it. 2 committees, 5 outsourcers, 3 internal people. You see, talking to IT cannot continue to be a committee. People don't want that. They just want to go in and say, I want a standard service, give me 3 of these, I click a button, you give me 3 of these, and we're happy. For us to get there, we have to stop this committee behavior. Is that fair? And that's the first recommendation I'm making to you. Stop looking at IT as a committee. Stop looking at this as a discussion. We have to start building standard building blocks and providing services that people say, I know what I'm getting, I know what I want. This is like coffee, okay? I know what I'm going to get, I know the temperature, I know the taste. I ask you for one, you give me one, end the conversation. It should be that simple. Sometimes it isn't, I get it, but 80%, 70%, 60% of the conversation should be that simple. Now, all this enables the following, which is In this brave new world, there's some really tough questions. Who owns the budget? Who owns the infrastructure, right? Because let's say the marketing officer goes out and buys a wonderful platform in Azure, and all of a sudden they drop it onto UIT, right? And they say, here you go, sir. Now it's yours. Who owns the budget for sustaining that? Who planned for that budget? So it's not necessarily a simple answer. Who manages that infrastructure? Is this IT ops? This should be a session by itself, by the way. I'm actually planning on something like this. But is this IT ops or DevOps? And what is the real difference between IT operations and DevOps, right? And is DevOps only developers with an API controlling infrastructure and they don't need IT anymore? I'll answer some of these questions as we progress today. But it's really interesting, some of the problems we're getting ourselves into in this brave new world. And the interesting part is, who does compliancy? Who does archiving? Forget compliancy for a second, okay? Because once you get it, you're all happy. But archiving is something that happens all the time, right? How do you archive? How do you know what to delete? How do you know how to consolidate? And obviously, who's responsible for the user experience? Now, looking forward, my humble recommendations are these 5. The first one is, IT has to stop trying to own everything. It has to understand that some things we're just going to broker, right? Some things we're just going to be the middleman that enables it, but not necessarily going to be the owners of everything. Because the business will continue to go out and consume different environments. And trying to go crazy to control everything will just label us as a control freak. So you don't want the control freak label. What you want is the enabler. So by that I mean we have to turn more into brokers. We have to integrate DevOps, because the last bullet that the close to last one is, we cannot lose production environment experience because of this new world of DevOps. Archiving, storage, network management, security, perimeter management, ITIL, COBIT are not a waste of time. We've proven it over and over. And large companies who disrespect this fact have gone down in flames in the newspapers. Is that fair? So we cannot play this world of, okay, so now it's all DevOps. You developer, you do whatever you want with the infrastructure. God bless you. Disregard all the best practices we have for perimeter management, as an example. No, because then you're not compliant anymore. So what's critical here is we have to integrate these motions. And that says also that we, as IT ops, have to learn, bless you, have to learn Agile and Scrum methodologies. And we have to stop working linearly, and we have to do Scrum sprints. And we have to take on smaller projects, smaller architectures, integrated architectures versus large-scale architecture. So we need to change this mentality. How many of you have heard about the snowman architecture model by Roger Sessions? Great guy, go look it up. Go look it up, very interesting. Snowman architecture, okay? Very interesting things. So with that said, let me stop this metaphysical world and start landing down. The first thing we're seeing in these companies who are actually taking this leap, and right now, I would say that everybody that I'm talking to you about is at least a quarter of the way ahead. Okay? So they're not all done, but let's say a quarter and more ahead. The first thing is, instead of owning the infrastructure, you have to start consuming, which means that you have to have extreme standardization. Now I'm talking private and public cloud here. I'm saying that you cannot have 15 stacks anymore. I did not say you have to have one. So 15 to 3, 15 to maximum 5. You cannot have 15 platforms anymore for whatever reason, because that's what's killing. Now this is the foundation for everything. Understand, no standard, no extreme standardization, no cloud for you. Okay? It's that simple. Now once you achieve that, the next one is you cannot retain all these platforms, like I just said, because they multiply the aspects. You see, if I have these 4 platforms that I have on the slide here, and I multiply them time, like you're seeing here, identity and application and data and etc. When I want to build resiliency, when I want to build growth, when I want to build expansion of the functionality, I need to grab that stack and expand the whole stack. It is super painful. It is extremely complex. It's what's breaking our back. It's what's breaking our budget. We have to start consolidating the thought into how do I grab these stacks and reduce them to standard consumption units, so that it does not become so completely hard to grow, expand, then have resiliency. Now, with that said, we're coming up with 3 new stacks. Because I'm a realist, which doesn't mean pessimist or optimist, it means focusing on the present, I'll tell you, I've seen now 3 types of stacks which are absolutely approved and correct. The first one is legacy stuff that you want to justify and you do it correctly. So let's say that there's, whatever, 20, maximum 30% of your infrastructure, you're going to say, I cannot move away from this, right? I mean, there's no way, not right now. Okay, as long as you know that that's it, and you're going to ring fence it, I'm good with that. Is that fair? But let's be a realist. You're not going to be able to grab everything and just move it to anywhere. But then the other 60% or more should be either on a private environment, which I'm calling here leveraged infrastructure, because I don't want to use private cloud, because it could be physical, virtual, private, whatever you want, just leveraged infrastructure, more aligned towards standard units, or completely aligned to standard units of consumption, and/or an infrastructure that consumes hybrid, which is public services plus this leveraged infrastructure. So those are 3 new stacks that we're seeing nowadays. And last but not least, and I cannot avoid this topic, we have to stop denying the fact that expanding legacy doesn't work anymore. See, that's it. We have to stop that. We have to migrate off of legacy. And if you're thinking of legacy being an old mainframe, an old Oracle, an old SQL, an old whatever, I don't care. I'm fine. Think whichever you want. I'm just saying we cannot grab those platforms and continue to expand them, because every time you expand that, what you're doing is you're taking the exact same amount of time it takes to migrate one workload, careful with my words, one workload away from that. So in other words, we did over 600 database migrations of line of business applications last year in the team that I work in alone. The same time it took to expand any of those things in memory and disk and whatever, in processing, upgrading the platform, the same time it took to do that, it took to migrate a workload out of it. So the point is, why migrate out of it? Because I'm not saying migrate it to whatever I want. I'm saying migrate it to a platform that consumes standard units. So I'm going back to my bullet number 1. Now you understand? The whole goal is extreme standardization. That's the goal. That's the future. Now, the reason to do this, I know you get it. Let me try to expand it a little bit and move on. Number 1, sandboxing. Today, failure is not an option. Failure should be an option. Is that fair? Because I want to fail 5 times for you not to sense it. So in other words, I can do 5 architectures in the time it takes you to do half. Right? So instead of 3 months, it takes me 2 weeks or 1 week. Cost of this is cents on the dollar. I can build the architectures, I can test them out, and I come back to you and say, you know what, man? We don't need to build it like this. It's not a pyramid, it's a circle, right? It's an hexagon. I can talk about different architectural patterns. It's not the point. I'm trying to simplify it. But the point is, once you come up with that, the sandboxing experiment takes you to the point of view that you're talking about failure being your best friend. I try 7 times, I see 6 failures, and then I know that the 7th one is the best one, or the 5th one, whichever. Second is, once you have that, this is what nobody talks about. Everybody's talking about VMs. Think about the industry. Everybody's talking about a server. I don't know a single architecture that is just one server. Is that fair? Not a single architecture. So stop thinking about one server. Think of the whole architecture, right? As many servers it takes, middlewares, front-end, back-ends, databases, data, communications, service buses, etc., middleware. Think of all that, all the interconnections, and now build me on PowerShell or on REST, the REST API, the behavior for how to deploy it, how to maintain it, how to monitor it, how to do pre-failure. So some people call it self-healing. I want to call a pre-failure behavior, right? So in other words, the database logs are getting full. How do you clean them before they get full, etc.? All this automation of self-healing. And then last but not least, how do I scale up, or God forbid, what nobody does, scale down? Now you see my point? If I can write all that, how would you call it? The operational manual? Operational behavior? If I could write all that into scripts or runbooks and embrace it and encapsulate it with the architecture that we just talked about, that is my production environment. That's where we should be shooting in my humble point of view. Is that fair? You see where I'm going now? Build an architectural environment that encompasses production. So that when you take it anywhere, within, this could be you and yourself, right? From one data center to another, or you and an outsourcer, or you and a partner, or you and a community cloud, or you and a public cloud. I don't care. You can transport this knowledge. Sadly, there's a lot of the stacks out there today that don't allow you to do this because whatever you build on a virtualized environment stays there, right? And you can't transfer that to a public cloud, which is sad. But we'll talk about some of these in a second. Why do all that? For the obvious reason, expansion and resiliency. I don't have to go deep into that. That's obvious. So, enough of that. Let me tell you our experience with Azure. This is a beautiful Azure slide. And I think this could be almost a presentation by itself. So I'm going to have to run faster than you wish I did on this slide. Number one, I know you're already reading it. I'm all good with that. There's 4 bullets I want to focus on. The first one is, and this is my second joke, we have to stop being server huggers. Server's mine. The port is mine. Don't look at the port, it's mine. You see that data storage over there? That's mine. Right? It's all mine, my pressure is mine. I know it's ridiculous, but that's the way we are, right? Talk to the finance department about their whatever, payroll application. Where's my server? That's mine. No, you have to stop becoming a server hugger and you have to become a service hugger. So you see, the service is yours. The units that service consumes are not yours. Those are the companies. And that's the difference. So that's the first big shift we went through, right? So that Microsoft IT versus Azure versus Xbox Live versus whatever would not say, oh, that's mine. No, it's not yours, right? It's in a data center and it's run by a third-party organization. Second, within Microsoft still, so I'm talking to you about our experience. Second, we went from siloed architectures, which is what everything I've been talking about so far, up until integrated architectures, which is the same thing. And now the third one. Do you notice where it says reliability? If you look a little bit across, you see network availability. So you see, you have to stop playing this 99.1009s game because it becomes increasingly expensive and it means something very dangerous. Let me rant here. Let me go down this rabbit hole for a second. What we've done in the last 20 to 30 years is totally disregarded the fact that software did not manage its own, stay with me, capacity, performance, security, and/or resiliency. What do I mean by that? Is a cluster part of the application? Nope. It's hardware or software or the OS subsidizing the resiliency of the application. What about mirroring on the storage? Same thing. What about all the capacity planning scientific methods you guys have? Same thing. I could continue. Am I kicking too hard on the shin or is this good? You see where I'm going? We're subsidizing the architecture of the software with a whole bunch of hardware and a whole bunch of other software. And we're making it more and more and more complex. And my point here is we have to start making it less complex and rely more that the software does a good job, God forbid, of this, of managing itself. Because then, when the services look at the data centers on the East Coast and they start saying, hey, I'm getting a degraded service over there. I'm going to start shifting my services somewhere else. Nobody senses a downtime. You see? So you go to this is like the bullet, right? This is the phrase you want to hear. You go from MTBF, which is mean time between failures, to MTTR, which is mean time to resolution. Now let's speak English here. I'm an old data center guy, so that's why I love these acronyms. Mean time between failure means that you really care about not failing, right? It's a crisis when you fail. Why? Because failure implicates triple failure always. I fail here, failure number 1. I wake up here, I don't have all my services, I go crazy until you fix me, and then that's second failure. I'm still not well. And then once it's working here, I got to come back to the first place. So that's my third failure. So you see, failure is very expensive. Is that fair? So we got to stop doing that. So measure failure. No, in the new world, you say, I don't want to measure failure. I don't care about it. I care that failure is so minuscule, it's so small, it's so imperceptible that I'm going to measure mean time to resolution. Because what's important to me, look, I care if I fail 1,000 times, but I care more that nobody else finds out. So that the resiliency of it is so good that nobody finds out that I failed. So it is my business to correct 1,000 failures. But I cannot focus on me, myself, and I, which is what MTBF does, is I worry about the IT service. No, I don't worry about the IT service. I care about the user experience. So you see how this is outward focused and that's inward focused. That's the main difference. Now, by the way, I take a lot of simplicity on my talk. I don't mean to offend anybody by saying this. I'm tired of not speaking out. So this is just if you want, it's a coming out party in the sense of we have to be honest with ourselves, right? We can't still focus on the service of IT, the committee of IT, the efficiency of IT. IT and the efficiency of IT do not make or break a company. What makes or breaks a company is the user experience. Is that fair? So let's talk about a unified cloud environment. Everything we learned, and no, I'm not trying to brag, this is not a bragging slide. Everything we learned came from all these services that we threw on the cloud. And there were two things that we did here. One thing is we said, we have to start running our properties on our platform, and we have to provide a technology that is enabled so that we run on it. So what did I say? Windows Server 2012, R2, is what Azure is run on. So Azure runs on that platform. That's a huge mouthful. There's almost nobody else that can say that in the industry. That I can give you the OS that I run Azure on? That's a huge statement. And we learned that because, again, you have to have a standard unit. Now, do all the other platforms? No, not yet. Are there plans? I'm sure there are. But let's just keep it to this because it's TechEd. Okay? But the point that you're understanding is this is a pretty big focus for us. To run on more and more on standard and replicable environments. So let's talk about the integrated vision. To go to hybrid cloud, you need what we've been talking about for the last, 7 years, which is a common identity, virtualization, management, development environment, right? As well as, obviously, data platform virtualization. But it really runs on the fact that you can transport things from one platform to another. The flexibility of moving things from one platform to another. So as this is a little bit more detailed, let me go into it. We're trying to focus so that we build our innovation. So that whatever we're building on the cloud, because I know all you heard the cloud first statement a couple of years back, gets down to on-premises as well. So we're one of the few that are committing to actually build the functionality that we're doing on the cloud and transport that back to on-prem so that you get as much of it as possible. There's some things we cannot ship down to you, like the content distribution network. That's obvious, right? But the other functionality, yes, you're going to see a lot of this, of how we build on the cloud or build on-prem and it makes it to the other platform. And this is a huge commitment that, again, not many people are doing. This is not for the faint of heart. It takes a lot of effort, right? To have Azure AD work and synchronize and be in conjunction with Active Directory on-prem, it's a huge statement. It's billions of dollars of investment to achieve this. So I want to shift gears right now for a second and talk about, I don't know if, is Tom here? Tom's not here. There you go. Tom, stand up. Take a bow. Tom is a track manager, but he's also one of the owners and creators of this incredible Service Foundation reference model. So at the end, if you thank somebody, thank him. This amazing piece of work, and I'm highly recommending it, it's pretty much a method for you to look at your operations. So it's not a role definition guide, but it is a method definition of how to look at, in this brave new cloud world, how to align your operations. So as you can see here, you're already separating service delivery from service operations and from management and support. The session is not about this today, but I wanted to give you, because I knew there would be appetite for this, I wanted to give you the reference for it. And the link is right there, right, on the bottom of the slide. And as these slides will be available, you'll be able to just get to that link. So I highly recommend you take a look at this, and I think Tom deserves huge recognition for the tackling on of this. Let's talk about compliancy for a minute. There's only one thing I like to talk about compliancy, not because compliancy is a bad thing. There's only one thing I like to talk about it because it sort of sets the record straight again. The problem we have with compliancy is we're always talking as if it's somebody else's responsibility, right? So we're always saying, oh, the vendor has to be compliant, or the software has to be compliant. Compliancy is a tango, and you need two to tango. That's the point. So what everybody's going to do for you and with you is called business agreements, which is I certify up to whatever you buy. So if you buy IaaS, I will certify that anything below the OS or the virtualization is and has all the requirements that your certification requires or that your compliancy requires. But above that, it's all you, man. So again, we cannot get compliant until you do your part and I do mine. If you buy SaaS, let's say Office 365, then we're responsible all the way to the application, but guess who's responsible for data compliancy and data classification? You get the point? So never think of compliancy as a you got to be compliant thing. It's never a ball you can throw out. It's more like something that you are going to do in conjunction with somebody else to go get that compliancy. And that's how you get any single one. If you want to talk about HIPAA, you want to talk about sub-Rs, you want to talk about Basel, that's the way it works. Okay? So whenever you're building this RFPs, these RFIs, or these ideas, always think of it as in which layer you're purchasing and up to where you're responsible and up to where they're responsible. Because nobody's going to be able to do your work for you, at least not in a compliancy or risk security assessment requirement. And obviously, we have all the ones that you would expect we would have and more and more. I mean, just last week, we got the European data compliancy. And that was huge, huge for every single service in our cloud. That was huge. And of course, this is going to be a battle between everybody out there, right? All the vendors, we're going to, oh, I have one up, and then the other guy's going to have one up. But the point is, this is let's just talk about this as a requirement to play the game. If we don't do this, there's no game, right? So this is going to be a very simple, of course, you can expect us to always be more compliant and include more work into this. We have actually an Azure Security Center that actively looks at all the compliancy and actively looks how we increase our footprint on the compliancy and requirement. In fact, we got PCI compliancy, etc. But let's go into the best practices now. Now we're down to the part of how, where I'll use the Microsoft slides to show. But if you want to think hybrid or heterogeneous tools, go ahead, okay? Just feel free. Understand I'm trying to highlight the best practices. And I'll try to keep this part, again, very, very short because I'll try to go to the next one, which is the architectures. So we're talking about 4 pillars. And I hope these 4 pillars really hit home. Now I'm going to change the language on you just to illustrate. The first one is about the fabric, okay? And I say fabric because I want to be very neutral in my language. And being neutral means the following. I don't care if you're physical, virtual, private, or public. I'm talking about defining the unit of consumption. And what's critical here, if you don't define that standard unit of consumption, we have a big problem. Then I don't know what coffee is, you don't know what coffee is, and then we go into committee mode. So how do you do that? Well, the first thing is you have to virtualize networking. And the second is you have to consolidate, dedupe, and start compressing storage. The only way you can do that today that we know how of, or the technologies that enable this, are network virtualization, which you already understand, but for storage is SMB 3.0 type technology. So stop consuming massive arrays and then filling them up because you have them. Again, this is horrible of me to say, but let me say it again. We buy a huge, beautiful bucket, and then because we have a huge, beautiful bucket, we have to fill it up, right? Stop doing that type of behavior. Start looking at how can I have this type of tier 2 storage reside on the cheapest, simplest type of storage that is out there. Because the more of this cheapest, simplest type of storage, the more it's super easy to consume and standardize on it. If you keep buying super complex environments for everything, it becomes budgetarily impossible to grow, right? So again, think of SMB 3.0 type architectures. In our case, storage spaces, okay? Third, server virtualization, totally clear. Cloud sourcing. Think of this thought as my forecast for the future. The weather tomorrow is going to be, the cloud you bought today is going to be your cloud legacy. You didn't get it. You know what legacy platforms are? Well, that's what's going to happen in 5 minutes, 2 years, 5 years, 15 years. You're going to have a whole bunch of legacy clouds. And so don't think that we're so special, that we're going to run away from history, right? The mistakes of yesterday are still going to be the mistakes of tomorrow. So my point to you is architect something that you want to live with in 10 years. Is that fair? think of something that you can consolidate. Because if you end up with 15 clouds, you're going to have as much server sprawl as you have virtual sprawl, as you have storage sprawl, as you have cloud sprawl. And we know all that just costs a ton of money. And then we have to justify how to consolidate. The last but not least is identity management, high availability, and role base have to be taken into consideration at the unit level. Okay? At the unit level. So with that, once I have my unit, I want to define the architecture of the service. And this is the part where we build the architecture or the template of the service, or if you want to call it a stamp. Once you do that, you have to look at three things. Number one, we're not going to run away from physical. You're always going to have a little bit of everything, right? Unless you plan on building something fresh, new in the cloud. And there's some companies that are lucky enough to do that, but 99% of us aren't. So you're going to have to look at the whole architectural footprint and understand that that's going to become your service template. And hopefully, you're going to create a reusable repository of these templates as in a library, okay? But don't go into the mistake of thinking that once you've defined the architecture, you've defined the deployment methods. Let me explain my language. The architecture is just the behavior of how I grow, how I do resiliency, etc. But when I have 3, 4 buttons for the users, the first user can say, I click a button and I want a logon. The second one could say, hey, I want more front-end servers to increase service capacity or service delay. And the last one could say, I want a full stamp replication for dev test environments. So you see my point? Defining the architecture is not the same thing as defining the deployment capabilities or the deployment mechanisms. So you have to do both. The third pillar is, how do I measure consumption? This is critical. Some people are obsessed with chargeback. I actually don't like it because chargeback within a company is just moving money from one pocket to another. I like showback, which is I give you a bill, you say, yes, this is what I consumed, you mock pay me, and we're mock friends. Okay? I love that. That's all good. And we're not finding in front of the CEO of why we messed his finances because we started moving internally money like crazy and nobody knows where the money ended up in. Okay? So all that is good. But I'm not obsessed with chargeback. I'm obsessed with resource utilization. I'm obsessed with knowing who consumed those units. Because if you know who consumes those units, then you know how to look for the future and how to justify growth. So you can go to the CEO and say, look, sir, or to the board and say, look, gentlemen, ladies, we need more money because our sales department is selling 3x versus cost of sales. Boom, there you go. Here's more money. It's a pleasure doing business with you. But I know how to justify my expenses. Okay? And last but not least comes all of the DevOps stuff that you expect. I don't have to go deep into this. There's maybe one aspect I want to call out, which is dashboarding. We have to get better at dashboarding. We have to get better at showing people like a bank, right? This is your balance. You don't care how I operate finances. You don't care how I control the interchange of transfers of money. You just want to know what your balance is. So that's what I mean by dashboarding, the balance. So now how does this look in the Microsoft world? I'm going to run like crazy through these slides because you've seen it all. Windows Server 2012 R2. It does provide network virtualization. It does provide SMB 3.0. It does provide high performance and resiliency. As you saw in the keynote, increasing new methods of resiliency, as well as it includes the integration with Azure AD. Again, I'm not going to go deep, right? I just mentioned everything I said here with technology, I just mentioned a second ago. Now, you can buy that as an OS, you can get that as an appliance. It's called Fast Track. If you buy it from, example, Cisco, it's called FlexPod. And you can get that as Azure services. Now you understand what our strategy is. Our vision for you is simple. A platform that once you define it, you can transport it, whether it be to you, to a community cloud or a partner cloud, or to Azure, and you don't have to redefine it. Let me say that again. You build once and you copy, versus you build once and you migrate. You know why I don't like migrations? They have a percentage of success. Copy doesn't have a percentage of success. I copy, it works. Percentage of success means you may fail 2 out of 3. I don't like that. I don't like the effort of bringing more partners, more services, more tools, more, because you know what it does? Is it cumbers the whole transition. I like the idea of get all that effort into getting the units right. into getting the operational method right. And then if you have to migrate it, move it, or grow it, you can. You have the flexibility. Am I going too fast into this, or is this good? You guys are happy with the speed? Okay. If you want me to go deeper into the technology, I can. I have no problem. I'm just trying to keep this at an architectural level because this is in the architectural track. So let's talk about the definition of the services. This is quite fun. I mean, it's simple. We're talking about, within the System Center Virtual Machine Manager world, we're talking about anything pretty much Hyper-V, vSphere, Zen. And as you know, we're not talking about replacing your current consoles. We'll integrate with your current consoles. But the point to say this is simply to say that we are completely heterogeneous in this fact. And we can enable you through your environments to build, through assigning roles and quotas and all that. And I know I'm using some legacy slides right now, so I apologize. Building this template, and this is the point I'm trying to take. Whether you build a template however you want, this is Virtual Machine Manager, right? My point is, build the behavior of the template and the consumption methods of the template and the resource assignment of the template so that I know that the database, being my SQL, Oracle, SQL Server, etc., right? I know how I consume it. I know how I get charged for it. I know how it grows. I know how it behaves. I know how to monitor it. I know how to maintain it, okay? I know how to archive it. And therefore, the same for the layer of a, whatever, middle Java or .NET applications or front-end, which could be Linux or Windows front-end web servers. If you notice, I try to go as agnostic as I can on this. But I'm trying to tell you, once you define these templates, the focus. So in other words, I'm assuming you know the tools. I'm trying to tell you how we're seeing people use them, okay? Which is different than me teaching you about the tools. This is not a session about teaching you about the tools. It's more about how people are using them. So then what we're seeing is we're seeing this increasing method of deployment capabilities, like I said at the beginning, one guy looking for a logon, the other one, et cetera, et cetera. Now, once you do that, the beauty of this platform is that I can, through Orchestrator and or PowerShell, orchestrate 4 types of behavior. And here, I'm really recommending that you listen to these 4 types. I'm sorry I didn't build a slide for this for you. Number 1, addition and or creation of the environment. If you want to call it deployment, God bless, okay? But you understand what I mean. The first one is creation of the environment. The second is self-healing, right? Which is understanding preconditions of failure and automating preconditions of failure, okay? So that you can resolve. The third, which could be interchangeable with the second, is maintenance. We're seeing a ton of people have separate and or disintegrated tools for patching, for maintenance management, right? And so Orchestrator is incredibly good for those types of scenarios. I'm seeing more and more and more, and my job is to talk to Fortune 2000, Fortune 5000 companies worldwide all the time. And I'll tell you, I'm seeing more and more people saying, I use Orchestrator for the last mile or pre-miles of work that has to be done for the patch to work. So fascinating how they're using this for maintenance. And last but not least, for recovery. So what's interesting is I'm seeing companies that are very good doing 1 and 2, and others that are really good doing 3 and 1, but I'm not still seeing people that are good doing the 4 of them, and I'm highly recommending it, right? Take a look at the 4 methods. And whether you want to do that with Orchestrator or PowerShell or REST API or God bless you, it doesn't matter. The point is do it, right? And embed that into the operational environment of the unit of consumption for that architecture. Now, I wanted to show you here, just because there's many disbelievers in the audience, God bless your hearts, this is the management pack for VMM and the management pack for vSphere, right? Just to give you a taste of how heterogeneous and how serious we've taken this. Now, let's talk about operate and monitor. Everything I just said consolidates into this single dashboard here. In Ops Manager, we've added the capability, as you know, to do 3 or 4 pane dashboards. And this is super powerful for your end user. Because it has 3 qualities that I want you to laugh about it right now. But I also want you to understand that you're laughing at something you shouldn't. Okay? Which is they have to be pretty, they have to be simple, and they have to be clear. If they're not pretty, simple, and clear, me as a user don't want it. Right? If you're going to give me here the case number of the server going down, not my job, dude. It's yours. You see? I want here to know that the map is light up with green check marks and little sliders. So you can do that with Ops Manager because we consume the whole template. because we're seeing the whole template and you're not redefining the whole template. Now, that's huge because if I go into a configuration tool and I deploy something and then I go into the other 7 tools I have for monitor, deploy, patch, whatever, and I have to redefine the architecture every single time, it kills me. It kills the whole motion. That's why this suite is taking us 7 and something years, 7+ years, to get it to be this integrated. And so the value and the problem that you're facing right now is, should I buy best in class or should I buy a more integrated suite? Well, you know what my recommendation is, and I'm talking as agnostic as I can. I'm dead serious, okay? I'll put my name in front of the company that I work for, and I'll tell you something. I believe integrated today wins a little bit over best in class. Not because you're not going to get the best out of System Center, it's because obviously there's tools that do best of A, best of B. But integration is a huge, huge, huge understatement that we've had for the last 10 years. And now we're starting to feel it. And so obviously this gives us all the way to application performance management, which takes me to user experience management. So if you can start thinking about client-side, server-side, and synthetic transaction monitoring integrated into your platform, it becomes extremely powerful. Now this is the nirvana for a lot of us, so that's okay. But at least know that it's there and the capability is available. One thing I love about this is we build this to be a cross-cloud monitoring tool. So you're not looking at 7 tools to see, okay, this is the part of my network, this is a part of my Windows environment, this is part of my Linux environment, this is the 3 clouds I bought and I need 7 consoles for this. That's impossible. So this is really powerful as it is. Now, just to give you an example, this is the Java Enterprise environment monitoring that we can do for synthetic transactions. It's very powerful. We can do this with Java execution environment. We can do this with Azure SDK, and we can do this with .NET. Okay? I wanted to flash very quickly the Linux versus Windows, SQL, Exchange, and SharePoint capabilities of the management packs. Like I said, flash very quickly, because I wanted you to understand that the deeper these things provide you, that you don't have to build yourself, it's a huge benefit. But I also wanted to highlight the incredible array that you have here at the Expo, right, of management packs built by our ecosystem, which goes into things like Oracle and SAP, and some of these things are just spectacular. They're really incredible how deep they go into the monitoring and management of these environments. Now, let's talk for 1 second about Linux and Unix. As you can see, we can do virtualization, operations management, configuration, and endpoint protection for most of the Linux distributions, which is, I don't know if you knew this, right? This is pretty good kept secrets that not everybody knows that we can do out of our platform. But we can also do monitoring and configuration management for those Unix platforms that you see on the screen. So it's quite powerful. And just to finish, I want to quote here from the Oracle website the support agreement we went with them. Now, if you notice, this is huge. And I read, Oracle is now extending that support by providing certification and support. So full support, full certification. You don't have to migrate to physical, nothing. Most people would say, okay, the database. No. Oracle applications, middleware, database, Java, and Oracle Linux on Hyper-V and Azure. This is a huge, huge statement. So, enough of the platform. Let's talk about the architectures. Okay? So far, so good? Sorry, I missed it. I have 2 slides for you before the architectures. Let's talk about private cloud in a box. We call it Azure PAC. Why? Because we love to put more acronyms in your dictionary. I don't know. The point is, Azure PAC, think of it as private cloud in a box, okay? And the idea is quite simple. There were some people who came up to us and they said, I don't want to run on Azure because whatever, compliancy, regulation, security, whatever you want, right? Just, I don't want to run there. I want to run on my environment. What can you give me? So look, Azure is, in a very simplistic, incorrect way of saying it, the elastic platform you see there on the slide, the templates, the service bus, and the portals, right? So if you're running on Windows Server 2012 R2 and System Center 2012 R2, and I'm sorry to tell you that today, that's it. Right? This is not anybody else's technology, sadly, but that's the way it is. Today, that's it. If you're running on these 2, you can download Azure PAC for free. And that's more than anybody else is going to tell you. I mean, this should be a big statement right there. because I want to know who else is giving you a whole cloud pack for free. And what you get is the templates, the service bus, and the portals. Who is this for? This is for somebody who looks at Azure Pack and says, I'm pretty good. Everything it provides to me, it's what I want, right? Because obviously, as you're going to see in a second, you can run on top of it OpenStack applications, platforms, virtual templates. So whatever can run on top of it is from the open world, right, Linux, and from the Windows environment. If you want to customize this to heck, I dare you to think, wouldn't it be better just to build it on System Center? So understand, if you customize this to the craziest extreme, not worth it. If you're close to what this gives you, beautiful, download it and use it, right? So maybe this is incredible for your dev test environment and not so much for 2 production environments. I don't know. I'm just trying to say, don't grab something, break it completely, and then say, oh, it's not good enough for me. Let's see how much you would need to break it before it's not good enough for you. It looks like this. And I just wanted to add 2 clicks. I could go way deeper into it. But it is really, if you notice the amount, right, of services that we have on Azure Pack, there would be, in a simple analogy, the IaaS services you have in Azure. So we can't obviously give you Hadoop or the content distribution network, right? I mean, it's logical. Because then I would have to drop 1,000 containers on your data center. It doesn't make sense. Well, it's 1,000, it's just an exaggeration, but you understand what I'm saying. Versus, I can give you all the IaaS workloads, so that's what you get here. And the portals are extremely similar. So why is this beautiful? Why is this a great strategy? Because you can deploy a completely homogeneous experience for your user, whether they're consuming private cloud or public cloud. Now, enough of this. Let's go into the so-promised hybrid architectures. I'm going to start simple, and I'm going to go increasingly complex as I go forward, okay? These are the scenarios I'm going to be touching upon, by the way. So, the first one is we're seeing a lot of people saying, I don't want any more of these, I send off backups to somewhere else, right? Scenario. So a big scenario is just backing up to the cloud. Now, this has to be encrypted, and hopefully you can attest that it is compliable with your certifications or whatever you need. So once you do that, the point is DPM or Windows Server can back up into Azure directly. And that's a beautiful solution for just tape consolidation type environments. We're seeing a lot of that. We're seeing also a lot of recovery manager type environments where people are using recovery manager within Hyper-V and the console resides on Azure, right? So again, I'm not talking about future things, I'm talking about current things. So understand, I'm not going to make any announcements here, nothing. That's for keynotes. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to tell you how people are currently using. So we actually have quite a good number of customers that resided on the first storm that I mentioned at the beginning, Sandy, and that went, and the console in Azure was a lifesaver because they didn't have a data center to go on. So being able to go into Azure and just say, okay, the data that I replicated from A to B to C now resides in C, right? So production environment is now C. It's a huge benefit right there for recovery. The third one, and where we start getting more interestingly, is Store Simple. If you haven't gone to a Store Simple session this week, go. That's my simple recommendation, just go. It's an incredible little device. Think about it, and I'm using correct terms, okay? Loosely coupled terms. Think of it as a NAS, okay? So this is a local environment, and what you're doing is you have 3 tiers to it. And the first tier is SSDs, and you get compressed, deduplicated, as you can see on the slide. The second tier is deduplicated and compressed, it's just standard drives. You can pin files in the whole 9 yards, but the point here is this is for what you're going to have for tier 2 or tier 3 storage, okay? Don't think of this as your tier 1 storage. The beauty of this tier 2, tier 3 type storage is once you set policies, it encrypts the data, it keeps the certificate local, and it sends the data to Azure. Now, the data that's on Azure is not accessible. It's not like you can access it really slow. No, you cannot access it, but you set policies for recovery. So you see, this is a great, great backup and or archiving solution. Amazing, because what you do is you set policies, and then you stop managing data as storage, and you start managing it as archival, right? As thinking, okay, where should this data reside? And I'm not thinking of it as a whole, like Exchange. I'm thinking at the bit or the block level, right? I'm thinking more at the level of what should I do with this file? And you can also set very interesting scenarios for user desktop type, backup, etc. There's a whole bunch of good scenarios. So just the 4 more common ones. The typical one is archiving, which is the one I've been talking about. The second one is file shares, because you get an all-in-one service, right off the bat. The third one is SharePoint. Now, when I say SharePoint, stop thinking of the database. Think only of the objects. Okay, so the objects, the files, are the ones that are getting archived per policy. And we have a SharePoint database optimizer for this. And then last but not least, for virtual environments, whether it be ours or VMware's, we can go into an incredibly useful virtual machine type of archival system. Let's say you have a whole bunch of virtual machines that are test dev, and you're done, right? I mean, the system is in production. What do you do with these? So the beautiful here is you can set some policies and send them to the cloud. Now, why is this send them to the cloud good? Cents on the dollar. Why would you spend your hard-earned dollars on, or whichever currency, on your super expensive SAN on archival? You see my point? Why would you? Run better things on it. Use it for better. I never said throw it away. I just said run it for better. And then, now let's go through some of the more interesting scenarios, more complex. Here on IS, I threw the whole kitchen sink at this example. So let me go through it. I know this is overpopulated. If we're talking about development, we're talking about certificates for developers, be able to differentiate them. If we're talking about users, we're also talking about certificate granted access. We're talking about replication. I'll talk deep about this in a minute with Active Directory. So you can get Active Directory authentication, whether it be on the cloud or on-prem. And once you get to the frontal tier, you're either touching the content distribution network or you're touching a load balancing auto-scaling set for front-end servers. If, as I said, IaaS, I'm going to say that the front end is going to be a virtual machine. This is the virtual machines that you create on Azure, standard, and you set and you manage everything that's in them. So if this is a web server or a processing server, your deal, whatever you want it to be, right? On the Linux and Windows distributions that we support. But then you have also different types of storage. You have blobs, which would be, just think of blobs as just files, right? You could obviously manage those blobs with either a queue and or a list and or a table. There's different architectures that support each one. I'm going to tell you in a second, the next example is going to be an example of somebody who has Internet of Things. So like the tractor company I mentioned that has a whole bunch of devices. In fact, my example is going to be a medical company. This is a true example. A medical company that their medical devices don't live in a pool environment, they live in a push environment. So they send out. Right? They build a packet and they send it to the mothership. And so think here that that could arrive, become a blob. I get an index, I support that whether it be on a list or on a queue, and then I work on whichever mechanism you want, first in, last out, last in, first out, whichever you, first in, first out, it doesn't matter, right? And then that's how you use those types of storage. So don't start thinking that blobs and VHDs are your only method. You have to think grander here, because you have a whole bunch of architectural options for your mechanisms of management of data. And then obviously that goes to a tier 2 or a tier 3. The tier 2 could just be standard machines versus tier 3 could be more of a database tier. And here you could be thinking of SQL Azure or you could be thinking of Hadoop, okay? Which in our case, it's HD Insight. So far so good? Am I getting excited and talking too fast? No, good. Let's talk about this medical device architectural example. This is a real company. What they did, I put here connected devices just to be generic, but basically what they did is their devices push out a package which contains maintenance information about the equipment, but also dispense and how the equipment manages itself on its functions. And so what this company gets is not only a preemptive maintenance information, they also get usage information of the device. So it helps them build a better device for the next generation, right? What were the most commonly used functions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so for that, you need an ingress node. Now, why did I call this PaaS? Because as opposed to me letting you create virtual machines, we're going to ask your developers to build the code on .NET or Java and just push that into a PaaS machine. A PaaS machine, or a worker role, to translate to the correct language, is literally a machine that you don't define the OS, you don't define the execution environment, you just publish code to it. That's what a worker is. And that's what passes in the Microsoft language. Because out there, there's a whole bunch of, everybody's running wild with all the definitions, right? So I'm talking to you about our definition. So this is a great environment. In fact, the country that is directly beneath us, if the Earth is actually looking up, so the place where I'm from, Mexico, the taxes are run, all the taxes of the country are run on Azure. And if that's not impressive enough, it's 120 million people, okay? It's not just Cancun. I know you're thinking that way. So if that's the case, if that's not impressive enough, think about it this way. It runs on PaaS. It's quite impressive, right? So with that said, then you have the analytics, SQL, Azure, et cetera, for the consumption, okay? So I think I've given you some good examples here. Let me go through the last 2 slides of the architectures. Let's talk a little bit now about identity. So on identity, if you're just thinking about Active Directory as an Azure service, you can be thinking about common identities from third parties, like would be Google or LinkedIn or Facebook, et cetera, that you could connect your consumers from. Don't just think about your constituents inside the house. Think about your clients. You could also be doing for your constituents or your people inside the house, you could be thinking about connection of this with Dynamics or Office 365, right? And identity management. You can also, like it says there, custom LOB apps or third-party ISVs. Now, the interesting examples are the following 3. The first one is multi-factor authentication via DIR-sync or password hash sync. That's one way. Another method, right? So as you can see here, using attributes are synchronized using DIR-syncs, including password hash. The second one is just either one way with DIR-sync and the way back with the ADFS, right, with Federation Services, or the full circuits with the Federation Services. That's another method you could be thinking about. And last but not least, this is my favorite example. It's a very large insurance company here in the US, and they are using this, which is for, let's just say, above 20,000 of their physical on-prem devices, which is the laptops and PCs and whatever that people get. Those are run via AD. Their session gets authenticated via Active Directory. But all the BYOD devices, which I don't have my cell phone with me, but if I had, I would show it to you. All the BYOD devices, which is cell phones and tablets and whatever not, get authenticated via Azure AD. So it's a beautiful solution because you don't have to worry about the growth of the BYOD platform. You can just pay per user, right? And you can set a cap to that. So it's a very interesting scenario right there. We're seeing increasingly a lot of people using test dev in the cloud. So I've seen things like SharePoint test dev in the cloud and then production. And then promotion to production on premises. So people test dev in the cloud and then they promote to on-prem. We're seeing people even do Oracle on Linux, development in the cloud, and then promotion to production on-prem. So we're seeing a lot of, I wanted to show you 2 ends, right? One that you would say, oh yeah, that's very safe, that's Microsoft environment. But I also wanted to go a little bit above the crazy chart and go like, no, we're seeing this type of work too. Why? Because of licensing and also because of benefits, right? Of just speed and agility to deploy. And then the last 3 are SQL. The first one is, I think, quite the most powerful one, which is for developers in SQL, you can publish, compare, sync, import, export, and register and unregister to either an IaaS SQL instance on Azure or SQL as a service, right? SQL Azure. So you can publish and compare. It's very powerful. You can back up to Azure, depending on the versions, what capabilities you have of your SQL on-prem. And last but not least, you can do business continuity. So you can do backup, availability groups, periodic snapshots, and geo-replication. Super, super interesting scenarios for different types of architectures. So let's wind down and try to close this session. I try to do a little bit of everything for everybody. So I know somebody's going to say, oh, you went too wide. Okay, but I'd rather be wrong on that end than leave you hungry for something, right? Each one of these topics can be very deep. But understand, I think the benefit of the vision that we have at Microsoft is the following. When you go from physical to virtual, there's a migration. When you go from virtual to private cloud, there's a migration. And there's licenses, and there's an inclusion. When you go again from here to whether it be public and or partner cloud, again, there could be a subscription, there could be a service use, could be different management tools. What we're trying to do is we're trying to grab all these conversions, all these migrations, and reduce their effort. We're never going to get to zero. We get that, right? But just reduce it as much as possible. And that's what we're trying to build. So we're doing that by obviously trying to homogenize the public versus the private environment, even with heterogeneous. And some of the great case studies that you've already seen, Domino's, right? I love this quote. This is not from us. This is from the Vice President of Global Infrastructure. As you can read there, 15,000 computers, 10,000 stores, 2 people managing that. It's quite impressive. Lufthansa Systems on a hybrid cloud. Aston Martin, Telefonica, reducing 18,000 physical servers and consolidating to a data center in Madrid with 6,000 servers. Nothing here is small, right? I'm not talking about anything that's small. I hope this was useful more than anything. I hope this starts the conversation on a better note. And I really, really thank you for your time. So. If there's any questions, we're going to be here a couple more minutes, and please approach the mic if there's any questions. It's 10 to the 24 exabytes, which is 10 to the 24 petabytes. So we're at the 40 zettabytes now. So what's next? So understanding that, let's go completely to the opposite end. And then let's look at a case study. I want to share with you another one of these problems, big problems that we're facing today. So we faced a very interesting situation with Sandy. Everybody knows about Hurricane Sandy, right? Okay. So what happened with Sandy, for those of you who have not analyzed this deeply, is that it wasn't a single city calamity. It wasn't a disaster of a city. It was a disaster that hit multiple states. And if you look at the size that I'm talking here on the map, this is the size of half a country. I mean, this is huge. And so my point to you is, what happens when we have a disaster like this? You can have amazing dual data centers within a region that need diesel to run their generators so that you're up and running, and you have incredible high availability schemes. Fair? And everybody's happy with that. What happens if you can't get diesel because the problem spans across half of the country? So how long are you going to be able to run? 2 days? 5 days? A week? You see where I'm going? What happens when you're failing over from New York to New Jersey like many other companies there? Well, understand, both data centers were hit just as bad. So this became a huge, 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 horrible problem. And in that sense, we did very interesting actions. The first action is obviously the development on hurricane status and health services. Because understand, when there's anything this level, you have to care for people. Is that fair? You have to care for people first, right? So health services is the most important thing you can do. And second, all the contingency plans, because that's what you built for. Agreed? Now, just to make the point, because like you see, these slides are just very fast for me. I just want to intro the whole conversation. Every service had an impact because of this, because we have a couple, also it's expansive to a heterogeneous stack. The last part, I don't know why I put it at last, maybe just to keep you in the session, I think is the most exciting one, which is custom and specific scenarios that we've seen, architectural scenarios of how people are using hybrid cloud. And so we'll go into, it's about 14 of them, right? And I'll go fairly fast in some, and I'll go deeper into others, of how we're seeing people actually adopt. So this is sort of the session of which scenarios people are picking to go into hybrid cloud. Now, when I say hybrid cloud, I'm sort of sorry, because you're going to say, well, there's always a public cloud component to that, and there's always a private, and therefore I'm talking about cloud, period. But I say hybrid because I don't think that, and there's very few enterprises that have services that just run on public. And there's a lot of services that run on private, but here is what we're seeing most commonly, which is people adopt across. Fair? Good? Everybody's happy? Let's start. So the only trend slide that I like to keep is this one, and it is because if there's one thing that staggers me, is the amount and growth of data. So think of the whole slide as a single point, which is data is growing so fast that we have 3 huge problems. The first one is We can't solve it like we used to, right? 44x versus 1.4x of data growth versus how many people are graduating worldwide with an IT degree associated to them. So we don't have enough people to solve the data problem. Let's just start by that. So we got to be smarter than just throwing people at this. We don't have the budget, right? Because 70% of budget is still being allocated the old way for maintenance and 30% for new innovation. So again, huge problem. But the whole source of this is that just on email, in 2014, data growth was as bad as the last 3 years. And we're expecting 2015 to be the same as the last 5 years. So you could argue very easily, well, that's spam. Yes, it's spam, fine. But you know what? If I look at your transaction, it's working. I'm blown away. Either lunch was not that good, or you guys are super nice. Because this is the farthest away room of the whole conference, right? I mean, I just want to get that one right. Thank you for being here. Truly, truly appreciate it. Excuse me? You got the first one. You want to give it away? Don't volunteer. Don't volunteer, man. No. Sadly, we're not giving away pretty much anything but good knowledge and experience. Yeah, I know. It's like one person goes like, woo, that's exciting. I know, I wish. No, my area is sadder than that. If I had, the Surface Talks or something like that, you could push that way, but hybrid cloud, you can get some smoke. Let me ask you guys a question. So just a couple of questions, just before we start, right? Who here is an enterprise architect or does architecture? Good. Who's looking for a technical session on how to build the platform? Not necessarily that. I love honesty, right? So I love to come out straight and say what you're going to get and what you're not going to get. So if this is not what you want to get, then you want to stay. It's at your own risk, right? We're not going to go too deep technically. We're going to go very, very broad and very deep on how people are doing it. So the strategy about it. And even though I'm apologizing, it's a matter of speech. I apologize because I will use some Microsoft slides and some System Center and Windows Server slides that I'm sure you've seen or you know about in order to tell you some of these experiences. So you understand, I'm not trying to say that you don't get that, but it's a good reminder for me to go into that topic. So I'll show maybe a screenshot about the chargeback procedures and methods on Service Manager to talk to you about what we've seen customer. Transactional data, your business data, it's growing at a very similar rate. If I look at your email, just with the acceptance of me saying yes to you to go have lunch, we're looking at the same thing. So we don't know what is relevant in that data. Is that fair? We don't have a good classification to understand what about all this monster is valuable, what isn't, what's business classifiable, what isn't, what is compliance, and what isn't. So the problem turns to, are we looking at this on the right angles? Are we trying to solve it with the right lenses, right? Because there are incredible companies. Like, I'll say a lot of examples today. I won't say a single name unless I have the logo on the slide. Is that fair? So there's a truck and a tractor company who's building a business because they put sensors on all the tractors to sense how deep they drop the seed and the dew point and the climate and the type of seed. And the new type of company they're building is with all that data that they're gathering, they're going to sell patterns for agriculture. It's fascinating. So you see, you're creating something from the classification and understanding of your data. Because if they would just aggregate this into the whole monster of email and all the other, they couldn't separate it, right? They couldn't say, oh, we're going to make a new company based on this. And they couldn't build a trends company on that. So fascinating stuff what's happening today. By the way, that's happening today. But the whole problem, just to go back to this slide, is the corner. If you see the corner, I think it's the right-hand lower corner. The average $1 billion company, which in most economies would be a medium-sized company, has 48 different systems of ERP. So that's a great example. We have too much of everything and we're not consolidating. So that takes me to not this slide, which is something you're going to see in many places, but the biggest joke of the session today. So sadly, I don't have good jokes. I'm an IT person, but as good as it gets, we're running out of Greek acronyms. We're at zettabytes now. So the problem is we're going to have to turn to another language now because we're totally running out of the numbers. A zettabyte, by the way, is use and do. It's not that I'm going to go deep into how to deploy that functionality within Service Manager and Virtual Machine Manager. Is that fair? Everybody's happy with that? Good stuff. We are right on track. Let's start. So again, thank you for being here. My name is Eduardo Kasner. It is a pleasure. I have a sin. If I get excited, I start talking too fast. You guys just have to go like this, and it's all good. Let's start. Well, I'll tell you something. This whole thing, here, let me go back to this slide. This whole thing haunted me for a while because I've seen, just like you, and I've read, just like you, enough cloud books to realize that everybody sort of knows what we want to define, but there's been few people that have actually built a hybrid environment, and that most of us are in that journey right now. Is that fair? And that being in that journey, it means that not all definitions are well done and that we're all going to stumble together. But the question was, can you build some good content? And that was my call to action. Can some good content be built around the practices? So I built the deck on three pillars. The first one being a very small pillar on why do it. Let's just figure out the right actions, right? The right problem to solve and the right solutions to go for. Because again, like you've heard 1,000 times before, Alice in Wonderland, if you don't know where you're going, it doesn't matter which road you take, same thing, right? So let's just agree on where the goal is. That's going to be very fast. That's going to take about 10, 15 minutes. If you are good with all that and you're like, this is boring, it'll just be 10 minutes of boring, okay? I don't think it'll be that boring, but I'm just saying that's only going to be a very short part of the presentation. Then I'm going to try to go deep into the how. The how is what practices we've seen people actually do. And while I'll talk very deep into how, and then I'll show you the Microsoft slides and I'll talk about the Microsoft stack because I work for Microsoft and etc., I will also try to tell you that it is pretty much a very agnostic piece of the presentation, which we'll talk about how you can do this